Hello, geeks. Welcome to the Ultimate History Quiz, where every question takes you on a journey through time. From ancient empires to groundbreaking revolutions, it's time to test your knowledge about history. Can you answer the secrets of the past, or will history rewrite you? Sharpen your wits, and let's dive into it to see who's the ultimate history champion. Before we play, hit the subscribe button to join the party. Are you ready for the challenge? All right, let's get started. Question 1. What present-day country was called Persia before 1935? Is it Iran, Syria, or Iraq? Iran it is. Next round. The Statue of Liberty was a gift from which country? England, France, or Spain? France it is. Keep going. What is the current name of the place once called Saigon? Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh City, or Phnom Penh? It's Ho Chi Minh City. What river did Julius Caesar cross to start Roman civil war? Tiber, Rubicon, or Danube? He crossed Rubicon River. How long did the 100 Years' War actually last? 126, 100, or 116 years? It lasted 116 years. What was the name of Charles Darwin's research ship? HMS Beagle, HMS Victory, or HMS Endeavour? It was HMS Beagle. What puzzle did Alexander the Great solve with his sword? Sphinx riddle, labyrinth, or Gordian knot? Gordian knot it was. Next challenge. What were Greek warships with 3 rows of oars called? Galleys, triremes, or quinqueremes? They were called triremes. Who is called the father of history? Herodotus, Homer, or Thucydides? Herodotus. In which country did the Easter Rising of 1916 occur? Scotland, Ireland, or England? Of course, Ireland. Who invented the seismograph? Greeks, Chinese, or Romans? Chinese. What was unique about Mayan achievements? Aqueducts, stone tools, or writing system? They developed writing system. What did Nebuchadnezzar build for his wife? Hanging Gardens, Palace of Nineveh, or Tower of Babel? He built the Hanging Gardens. Which country first allowed women to vote? Finland, USA, or New Zealand? New Zealand it is. Which civilization is known for its massive head sculptures? Olmec, Greek, or Inca? Olmec civilization. The Peloponnesian War was between Athens and which city? Corinth, Sparta, or Thebes? Of course, Sparta. How many hills was ancient Rome built on? 9, 5, or 7? Seven hills. Which civilization built Tenochtitlan? Aztec, Inca, or Mayan? Aztec is the correct answer. What ruins are associated with ancient Puebloans? Stone circles, pyramids, or cliff dwellings? Cliff dwellings. Which African empire was famous for salt and gold trade? Was it Mali Empire, Ghana Empire, or Songhai Empire? The answer is Mali Empire. Who captured the Inca Emperor Atahualpa? Hernán Cortés, Francisco Pizarro, or Vasco da Gama? Francisco Pizarro. What does Magna Carta mean? Great rule, great law, or great charter? It means great charter. Who made the first map of the known world? Anaximander, Ptolemy, or Eratosthenes? Anaximander. Where was the Battle of Hastings fought? Scotland, France, or England? It was fought in England. What island was Napoleon exiled to? Corsica, Elba, or Sicily? The answer is Elba. Who supposedly played the fiddle while Rome burned? Was he Augustus, Caligula, or Nero? Nero. What was Bangladesh called before independence? East Pakistan, Myanmar, or Bengal? East Pakistan. Who ran through the streets yelling, "Eureka"? Socrates, Archimedes, or Pythagoras? Archimedes. What is the world's oldest operating airline? KLM, Lufthansa, or British Airways? KLM it is. Which ship carried the Pilgrims to America in 1620? Santa Maria, Mayflower, or Beagle? It was Mayflower. Who was the most famous Greek poet? Was he Sophocles, Homer, or Aeschylus? He was Homer. Who was the first female pharaoh of Egypt? Was she Nefertiti, Cleopatra, or Hatshepsut? Hatshepsut was the first female pharaoh. An eye for an eye comes from which law code? 10 Commandments, Roman law or Code of Hammurabi? Code of Hammurabi. Which Roman emperor built a wall in northern Britain? Was he Hadrian, Trajan, or Augustus? He was Hadrian. When was Rome founded? 753 BC, 1000 BC, or 500 BC? In 753 BC, what were ancient Greek foot soldiers with spears and shields called? Cravers, legionnaires, or hoplites? They were called hoplites. Which empire did Charlemagne rule? Holy Roman Empire, Ottoman Empire, or Byzantine Empire? Holy Roman Empire. Which Ethiopian king ordered churches to be cut out of the rock? Was he Shaka Zulu, Lalibela, or Mansa Musa? He was Lalibela. Which team won the first Super Bowl? Green Bay Packers, Dallas Cowboys, or Kansas City Chiefs? Green Bay Packers. Who landed a plane in the Hudson River in 2009? Charles Lindbergh, John Glenn, or Chesley Sullenberger? He was Chesley Sullenberger. What covered the surface of Egypt's pyramids? Limestone, gold, or sand? Limestone. Octavian defeated Mark Antony in which naval battle? Actium, Lepanto, or Salamis? Actium is the correct answer. What were Aztec floating gardens called? Aqueducts, terraces, or chinampas? Chinampas. In which country was the largest T-Rex skeleton found? USA, Canada, or Argentina? In Canada. Cyrus the Great ruled which empire? Roman Empire, Persian Empire, or Babylonian Empire? Cyrus ruled the Persian Empire. What was the samurai code of honor? Laconic, chivalry, or Bushido? Bushido. The Ptolemy dynasty ruled which ancient kingdom? Rome, Egypt, or Persia? They ruled Egypt. In ancient Egypt, what were nomarchs? Architects, district governors, or pyramids? District governors. What was America's first cash crop? Corn, cotton, or tobacco? It was tobacco. And last round. Which Roman emperor was held for ransom by pirates? Julius Caesar, Caligula, or Nero? Julius Caesar, of course. And that's it for this quiz. Thank you for watching. If you like it, please give a big thumbs up and subscribe for more. See you next time.